الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار على سبيله إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Talkhis Nukhbatul Fikr, which the original author is Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, where he wrote this book as one of the thesis or one of those works or matan in the ilm ulum al-hadith, or what is referred to as mustalah al-hadith. So in the last session that we had, that based upon the system of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, or the layout of Ibn Hajar, that we had covered matters relating to Hadith al-Shadh. So after Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he discussed Hadith al-Maqbul by way of Hadith al-Sahih, then second Hadith al-Hasan, then he went on to discuss matters relating to Hadith that he discussed concerning that mukhalafat min ba'd al-riwat, where you find that some narrators that they may contradict others. So the first that he started with, linking to Hadith al-Maqbul, is what is referred to as Hadith al-Shadh. So this Hadith, as we had mentioned before, is where as he described that Hadith al-Shadh, as he stated regarding concerning Hadith al-Shadh, where مخالف الثقة من هو أوثق أو أرجى منه أو أكثر عدد. So we find a case where a rawi who is thiqah, that he contradicts a narrator who's more reliable than he is, or more sounder than he is regarding this particular matter. So this is still within the line as we had covered before, also regarding ziyadat al-thiqat. Then he went into Hadith al-Shadh, where as we mentioned that the definition that is given by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, that's what's now the established common definition given for Shadh, but also there's other definition that will add to this, as mentioned by the likes of Hadith al-Shadh, of al-Dhahabi, where he cover both section of what is included in Hadith al-Shadh. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll go to, in this session, discuss another matter pertaining to that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala have mentioned, where it is concerning another matter that he discussed, فَإِذَا خَالِفَ الدَّعِيفِ الثِّقَةِ, that he discussed another matter based upon this talkhis. إِذَا خَالِفَ الدَّعِيفِ, if a narrator who's da'if go against a narrator, contradicts a narrator which is thiqah, فَيُسَمَّى hadith al-thiqah ma'ruf, that the one who said to be thiqah, his hadith is referred to as ma'ruf. وَيُسَمَّى hadith al-da'if munkar, and the hadith that is da'if, that is weak, it is referred to as munkar. Then he mentions لأن الدَّعِيف لا يحتمل منه أن يخالف الثقة, where in this case a one who said to be da'if, then it is not considered, his case would not be considered in him going against someone who is thiqah. So the discussion in today's session regarding the topic of mustalahat that we'll be discussing in this matter regarding hadith, that you'll be discussing hadith al-munkar, that will go, and also hadith al-ma'ruf. So just when we discuss hadith al-shadh, we mentioned hadith al-shadh, that is considered to be daif. Shadh, as we mentioned before, could be in the matan or in the sanad. So in the matan, that we are more familiar with cases of hadith al-shadh that occurs in the matan. But also the ulama of hadith also discuss hadith al-shadh that occurred also in the isnad, in the chain. But that's more for people who are more specialist in this field. We might find hadith, so under hadith, that is, so the hadith al-shadh could be the entire hadith, or it could be a section of the hadith, or a sentence in the hadith, where sentence is said to be sahih, but another portion of hadith is said to be shadh. That portion is rejected and considered to be daif. So, and the part that is considered to be the hadith that is said to be sahih in relation to the hadith which is shadh is referred to as they were mentioned regarding, that's considered to be mahfuz. So what contradicts shadh, the correct portion of the hadith that is regarding hadith al-shadh, that hadith is considered to be mahfuz, and the one that is rejected is referred to as ashadh. In this now discussion regarding munkar, hadith are said munkar, and its opposite, the part that is correct or sahih, we refer to as maruf. And we'll discuss those matters. So the main discussion is regarding hadith al-munkar. If we're able to identify hadith, what is said to be munkar, and what goes along with this, then also the end result will be what is said to be correct, sahih, then that is referred to as maruf. So we now discuss this matter. So in our discussion on this matter, that in this discussion that we'll discuss regarding concerning what is said to be munkar, hadith munkar, istilahan wa lugatan. Also, I will discuss other matters pertaining to this. So starting regarding hadith al-munkar. What is said to be hadith munkar by way of istilahan. So linguistically, munkar with the word inkar, that the ulama mentioned al-juhud. So linguistically, munkar, inkar, juhud, jahada. So that will mean a person that something we said to be something which is rejected, or something, so the person are denied. So munkar, something which is rejected or denied, or munkar, something which is evil, something which is considered to be evil, wrong. So that's the meaning linguistically of what is said to be munkar. Also regarding matters pertaining, and also al-jam, manakir. So al-jam of munkar, manakir. So the plural will be manakir. As for istilahan, amongst the ulama of hadith, what they have defined as what is hadith al-munkar, you have several definitions that are given. The several definitions that are given. The one that of the definition that is given, that of hadith al-munkar, is what will be the definition of hadith al-shadh. So hadith al-munkar also will hold as would also be the definition that is given for hadith al-munkar, is also the same definition that is given for hadith al-shadh. And we have discussed hadith al-shadh regarding what is defined. So as we mentioned that al-shadh, that is al-ulama, which is more that the ulama mentioned the definition of Imam Shafi and also Ibn Hajar, and what becomes the more established, the more established and definition that they mention, annahu hadith al-shadh maraha thiqa, that a person that is narrated by a thiqa, mukhalif man huwa awthaq minhu. So a person who is said to be thiqa, but he contradicts another narrator or a group of narrators who are said to be thiqat, but they are more credible than he is in this case, or ahfad than he is, but he's contradicting them. So their narration will be considered to be accepted, and that will be, and is the narration of the thiqa will be, if it is rejected, then his narration will be said to be shadh. Then also, as we mentioned, that also the second, another definition that is given regarding a shadh that also would carry the meaning of munkar, as we mentioned, tafarrud al-rawi al-thiqa. We find a narrator who is said to be thiqa, that he is this only one, is the only narrator narrating something others of his colleagues did not narrate. And at times it may not, as we said, where in this case it may not mean that he's contradicting others, but in this case he's mentioning something no one else have mentioned. He's the only single narrator stating this information. So at times he may add to what others did not mention. So it's common information that others did not state, but we have him adding. So we mentioned that also is said to be hadith, that also is considered to be shadh, but also this definition also applied to hadith al-munkar. So shadh, at times the ulama, especially the ulama of old, that they will use the word munkar in relation to what we consider to be hadith al-shadh. So as we have said also regarding hadith al-shadh, that the word shadh was not used often or much by the ulama of old in relation to what we consider today hadith al-shadh. They use the word munkar that have a more broader meaning than the meaning that we have given it today or been established today. So shadh also take the meaning of munkar. That's one of the definition. Another definition that of hadith al-shadh, that's the definition that we said now is the one that become the more common definition used today. the more common definition that is used today, that and this definition that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala have mentioned regarding hadith shadh. So he have mentioned regarding concerning hadith shadh as the definition that is now given today, ma rawahu da'if, something that is not hadith, that is narrated by a person who is said to be da'if. And in this case, mukhalif man huwa thiqa, where he contradicts those that are said to be thiqat. So the case of hadith al-munkar, in the second scenario or definition, in this case, is the narrator who's contradicting others, he himself is da'if. So one who's a narrator who's da'if, contradicting other narrators, but these narrators he's contradicting, they are thiqat. So most likely, the ones to be accepted to be those which is the thiqat, and the one that is da'if, then his narration will be rejected. So that's concerning a definition that is given as what is intended, or the meaning of hadith al-munkar. And we said that's the more common definition that is given more so of the ulama of latter times. So the mention concerning the definition will be somewhat in line what is mentioned by Ibn Salah also, and those who have made the mukhtasarat of the book of Ibn Salah, Muqaddimat Ibn Salah. So they all kind of somewhat give that definition of hadith al-munkar. Of the point that they mentioned regarding concerning this matter, regarding the definition of hadith al-shadh, that I mentioned that in looking at the works and the statement of the ulama al-qudama, the ulama of old, the classical ulama of hadith, that regarding concerning hadith al-munkar, that there's not much a clear definition given by them. So regarding what they will say regarding, so there's no clear definition that is given by what is said to be hadith al-munkar, as they use hadith in a more broader context compared to the ulama of more that came after, that gave it a more specific definition, and how they use or what they deem to be hadith al-munkar. So that's concerning. So with this, they mentioned the ulama of old, that they are more broader in how they view what is said to be hadith al-munkar, which with them, it would also include hadith, what we refer to today as hadith al-shadh. So munkar and shadh, that they for them would be seen as something which is in the same basket, defined as somewhat very similar to each other. With so as they mentioned that of the ulama of past that I've mentioned regarding concerning that who of the earlier ones that I've given a definition regarding ashadh, that not clear definition, but then after others who came and tried to give a definition of a hadith shadh, of those that I mentioned, they mentioned Abu Bakr Bardiji is the one who have come forward and give some form of definition. And his definition that he mentioned, that his definition, أن حديث المنكر mentioned أن المنكر هو الذي يحدث به رجل من الصحابة أو عن التابعين أو عن الصحابة لا يعرف ذلك حديث. وهو متن حديث إلا من طريق الذي رواه فيكون منكر. That's of the early definition is given regarding hadith al-munkar. So they mentioned that as mentioned by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali in his book Al-Ilal. So they mentioned that hadith al-munkar, of the definition given by all, أن المنكر هو الذي يحدث به رجل, hadith that had been narrated by a person, عن الصحابة, upon the Sahaba, أو عن تابعين عن الصحابة, or that person narrates upon the tabi'in, who narrates upon the Sahaba. Then it mentioned لا يعرف ذلك الحديث, and that hadith is not known. That hadith is unknown. That hadith is not well known and established. Then it mentioned وهو, then they mentioned to the end of the hadith. So that's how they cannot give a definition of what is said to be hadith al-munkar. But then as we mentioned, the ulama of somewhat of latter time, I've given it a more clearer definition, as stated by some of the names that we had mentioned before. So that's concerning hadith al-munkar. So of the things that to be mindful of regarding hadith al-munkar, that if we were to look at the statements of the ulama and their judgment and their grading of hadith, when they use the word munkar, that we have to look to see in what context, not to measure or to understand their definition or their use of the word munkar in the way that we understand it today. As meaning, we understand it today, or a common use today, huwa ma rawahu da'if. What is narrated by someone who's da'if, mukhalifan liman huwa thika, contradicting one who's thika. If we understand it in that context, we may have some confusion regarding how the ulama of past, the early scholars, use the word munkar, because we are measuring them with our principle when they are not using our principle. So it becomes a conflict. We're using a definition that they are not using, they are not going according to the definition that we have given it by way of how we use it today. As we said, the word munkar with the ulama of past, it have a more broader definition. It would include shadh. So it would include, at times, munkar, hadith, we find a person who's thika contradicts another thika, and also a person who's da'if contradicting a person who's da'if. Or cases of munkar, the person who's a single person stating something others did not mention. There's no mukhalafa. So we have to be mindful regarding looking at those cases. So, of the things regarding concerning hadith, so Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, definition that could be summarized, huwa al-mukhalif al-da'if, a person who said to be da'if, yukhalif man wa awthaq minhu, that he goes against someone who's awthaq minhu. Awthaq, they mentioned that rather than the word thika, of the ulama prefer to use the word awthaq minhu, where they mentioned that arja minhu, where that person that generally is said to be of those who said to be is hadith, will fall in the category of arja or maqbool, of that person hadith is authentic, sahih, or hadith is hasan. So it means a person who's da'if going against a person that is hadith may be classed as sahih or classed as hasan. As for a thika, a da'if, contrary to another person who is da'if, then that's a different discussion. That's in the rank of hadith da'if. So that's concerning hadith al-munkar. So with munkar, of the thing regarding concerning hadith al-munkar, that when we look at the definition of the ulama have compared the definition of hadith al-munkar, and second the hadith of shadh, that they have things that are similarities and differences. So hadith al-munkar and hadith al-shadh, there's some aspect of this between them that they share, and also aspect where they differ. Nam, so they mention regarding concern, so this of the matter that one have to be mindful of, bainahuma umum wal khusus, things that are familiar or common between both, and also things that are particular to one over the other. So of those things, the differences in comparing between hadith al-shadh that we spoke about last week, in the last session, and hadith al-munkar, the things that are common between both of them that they mention, or mention that, of the things they mention that between both they share mukhalafa. Both share mukhalafa. That hadith al-thiqat, mukhalif al-thiqa, a reliable narrator contradicting one who's also more reliable or as reliable. Hadith, so there's a mukhalafa. Hadith al-munkar, that the one in this case that is contradicting is one who's da'if. But both have contradiction, one contradicting another. So it shadh is between two thiqat. Between munkar, it's a da'if contradicting one who's thiqa. So both shows mukhalafa. On this matter, then also a khilaf between the ulama regarding al-munkar is a requirement that there is mukhalafa. So with hadith al-munkar, for it to be of the shurut, the condition of munkar, that is their contradiction must be a part of it. One contradicting another. Of those who, based upon the definition, that is the more common one that is used today, ma rawahu da'if mukhalif liman huwa maqbool. Then it will, the criteria for thiqa, for al-munkar, that the da'if is contradicting one who's thiqah. Which has also, we mentioned in the previous session, that the discussion regarding is this a criteria, and as we said that it is not a criteria. That of the more sounder approach, and also by way of the application, the practical application of the ulama of old, that they have passed judgment on a hadith, they're saying it is munkar without there being any mukhalafa, without there being any contradiction. So at times there's contradiction, and at times there is not, just as the same as shadh. So as we said, the definition of hadith, al-munkar is also similar to that of shadh, where, so that's of those matters. So overall, I mentioned that between both shadh and munkar, the difference between both would be that with hadith al-munkar, the one who's contradicting others is da'if. With shadh, the one that is contradicting others is thiqah. So a thiqah with shadh contradicting other thiqat. With munkar is a da'if, a narrator who's da'if, is graded as da'if, weak, is contradicting those who are more acceptable, those who have the grade of maqbool. So that's concerning what is the thing that is common between both, and also the difference between both. So as we said, of the condition that they mentioned, so the shurut, hadith al-munkar. So the conditions that are attached or mentioned regarding hadith al-munkar. The first that they mention is al-mukhalafa. The first of the condition of hadith al-munkar, al-mukhalafa. That someone, a da'if, is contradicting those that are more reliable than he is. So as we said, that this is what is mentioned based upon a definition, but the discussion between of the ulama is this a valid requirement, that there must be mukhalafa. But they said, based upon the works of the ulama of old on their judgment on hadith, that at times hadith is said to be munkar without mukhalafa. So at times it may occur, and at times mukhalafa may not occur. The second condition of hadith al-munkar, that they mention that the narrator is a conflict between one who's da'if. So da'if contradicting those that are thiqat. So those are the other conditions. So in the case of munkar, according to them, that the person who's contradicting others himself is da'if. A third thing that they mention, so that's concerning, a third thing they mention regarding concerning the other mention, that also in the case of hadith al-munkar, fihi infirad. That also of the criteria, that there's a narrator who's mentioning something others did not mention at all. He's not contradicting, he has singled out himself, he's being singled out with saying things that others did not mention from his peers. So that also is mentioned as of the condition with hadith al-shadh. So it could be the conditions of hadith al-shadh revolve around: one, mukhalafa; second, da'if, contradicting thiqat; and third, infirad, a da'if saying something that other thiqat did not mention in the same hadith. So that's concerning, those are the conditions related to hadith al-munkar. The next of those things to be covered, mithal. So kind of somewhat an example of this. Of the examples that are mentioned, hadith that is stated, ما رواه حبيب ابن حبيب، ما رواه حبيب ابن حبيب عن أبي إسحاق السبيعي عن عيزار ابن حريث عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام قال: من أقام الصلاة وآتي الزكاة وحج وصام وقرأ الضيف دخل الجنة. And this hadith mentioned hadith in the Tabarani. Hadith in the Tabarani. So they mentioned regarding concerning that this particular hadith in the Tabarani, in Mujam al-Kabir, also in the Al-Bayhaqi, in Shu'ab al-Iman, with this particular hadith that has been mentioned here, that they mentioned regarding concerns to this hadith that we mentioned, that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned Ibn Abbas, man aqama as-salah, that the one who established the salat, wa ati zakah, and paid the zakat, wa hajj al-bayt, and they perform hajj to the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa sama Ramadan, and perform Ramadan, wa qara ad-dayf, and that they are good towards their dayf, they look after their dayf, dakhal al-jannah. So they mentioned regarding concerning this hadith that as for this particular hadith, that of those things that mention that if the person was to fulfill these acts, they'll enter Jannah. Establish a salat, pay the zakat, perform hajj, fast the month of Ramadan, also take care, look after their guests, treat them well, and all that, they'll enter Jannah. So they mentioned regarding concerning this particular hadith here that has been mentioned here, that of those who narrate this hadith, marfu'an upon the Prophet ﷺ. And that's narration, as we mentioned, concerning the hadith of, as we had stated, that narration of Hubayb ibn Habib and Abi Ishaq as-Sabihi and Azar ibn Hurayth and Ibn Abbas al-Hadith. This hadith, you'll find that this hadith, so Abi Ishaq we say is the main person. Others have narrated the same hadith on Abi Ishaq. And amongst those, we have Ma'mar ibn Rashid and also Ammar ibn Ruzayk. So we have Ma'mar ibn Rashid, Thiqat, all these narrators are, also Ammar ibn Ruzayk, and that narrated hadith, and Abi Ishaq as-Sabi'i, and Azar, and Ibn Abbas al-Hadith. And said, and Ibn Abbas mawkufan. So you have another narration that we find that two individuals, so we have three narrators have narrated this hadith. The first, Hubayb and Abi Ishaq and Azar and Ibn Abbas upon the Prophet ﷺ. And we mentioned the hadith that we have stated. Another tariq of the hadith that it's narrated by Ma'mar ibn Rashid and Ammar ibn Ruzayk and Abi Ishaq and Azar and Ibn Abbas from his statement, not going back to the Prophet ﷺ. So in this case they mentioned that Hubayb ibn Habib daif. Hubayb, that narrator, Hubayb ibn Habib daif. And is mentioning things regarding this hadith, that Hubayb is narrating the hadith going back to the Prophet ﷺ, at the Prophet ﷺ statement, marfu'an, while the others who are thiqat, Ma'mar wa Ammar, they are mentioning the hadith, that the hadith it is the statement of Ibn Abbas. The statement of Ibn Abbas. So in this case, which one we accept? In this case, we have Hubayb ibn Habib, who is daif, saying that the statement go back to the Prophet ﷺ, but also find other students of Abi Ishaq. So all these are the students of Abi Ishaq, or that is students that they're narrating that the hadith goes back to Ibn Abbas. So in this case, that the ulama will mention that in this case, then the narration that will be taken will be that of the one which is mawquf, because all the narrators are thiqat. The other one which goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, which is marfu', going back to the Prophet ﷺ, that one of the narrators is daif, and he's contradicting others of his colleagues on this matter. So in this case, they'll accept the ones that are thiqat, even though their narration it is mawquf, and reject the one which is marfu', because that narrator is a narrator and it is daif. So that's the case that they mentioned that called Abu Zur'a. So when they mentioned concerning this hadith, قال Abu Zur'a, one of the أئمة الحديث, قال هذا حديث منكر. He mentioned هذا hadith munkar. Nam, did I mention إنما هو and Ibn Abbas موقوفا. Why? Because it's the statement that this hadith go back to Ibn Abbas as his statement, not to the Prophet ﷺ. So this concerning a case, so in this hadith that you find that there was a difference between that da'if who narrate the hadith going back to the Prophet ﷺ and the thiqat, the trustworthy narrators, they narrated it as a statement of Ibn Abbas. So they might say that's a mukhalifa, or he have added something where he referenced this hadith back to the Prophet ﷺ. So is it something that he add? So some might say is this mukhalifa or he added. But overall, he stated things that other thiqat did not state, where he ended the hadith as a statement to the Prophet ﷺ, while the thiqat, they ended the hadith as a statement of the Sahabi Ibn Abbas. So that's concerning cases regarding where this occur in some hadith. Cases where this occur in some hadith. So that's concerning example regarding cases that have been mentioned on this matter. So I mentioned that also Abu Hatim الرازي قال هذا منكر لأن غيره من الثقات. يعني we said that narrator Hubayb, he mentioned that لأن غيره من الثقات, because others who are ثقات رواه عن أبي إسحاق موقوفا, that they narrate upon Abu Ishaq going back to Ibn Abbas, وهو معروف, and that is معروف, that's the authentic narration, that's the accepted narration. So they use the word munkar, and in this case they use the word maruf. They use the word, Abu Hatim use the word munkar, because that narrator, Hubayb, who is da'if, saying something that others did not. So on this matter, the hadith is considered to be, so that narration is considered to be munkar of the one which is the narration that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, and the one which is said to be acceptable, it will go back to the Sahabi Ibn Abbas. And as we had mentioned in the previous session, that you might find case with the ulama, I've mentioned regarding that sunnah hadith, that is considered to be, that they call considered hadith, is that the word munkar is used in a lot of cases regarding hadith, that sometimes that hadith that will be said to be shadh. Hadith that will be said to be shadh. At times, the ulama, or in many cases, the ulama of past will grade that hadith as, refer to hadith as munkar, as we had stated in the last session. So that's an example that is mentioned regarding hadith al-munkar. The next matter regarding hukum hadith al-munkar. So what's the ruling that is passed on hadith that are said to be munkar? Then the hadith al-munkar is said to be hadith which is ashad no' min hadith al-daif. It considered to be of the more severe case of hadith al-daif. So hadith al-munkar is considered to be daif, not just daif, but not only daif, but also of the more severe cases of hadith of weakness. Where it said daif, ashad anwa al-daif, of the more weaker of hadith. So considered to be of the more weaker of hadith. And it is mentioned regarding concern the ulama, they have mentioned that, as mentioned by As-Suyuti and others, as he mentioned regarding that of those hadith that are said to be that the more weaker, intense in weakness is hadith al-munkar, where it is stated regarding concern Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala, that he has a statement regarding hadith al-munkar, where he mentioned by stating, قال أحمد بن حنبل hadith and du'afa la yuhtaj ilay, that hadith that is said to be upon people who are du'afa, then it is not used as a source, is not relied upon. Then he mentioned fi waqt, in his time, wal munkar with a shahida, wal munkar abadan munkar, munkar abadan munkar. So hadith which is said to be munkar, it remain munkar forever. It doesn't, it can, it's of the weaker forms of hadith ad-daif. It cannot be used, it's mentioned as said, munkar, abadan munkar, it cannot use to support anything, nor anything can support it. It cannot be used to support other hadith, nor other hadith can be used to support it. So it is without any use. It cannot be used for anything. So that should concern the ulama of the oldest hadith to be a severe weakness. So it has severe, intense weakness where it cannot use to support other hadith, nor other hadith, there's nothing it can use to support it. So that's concerning what is discussed regarding concerning the general ruling. So it will be considered to be that so it will be close to those hadith, as I said before, hadith, that in the level regarding hadith al-munkar, regarding close to said no, hadith al-matruk and the likes. It will be to that the level of severity in its weakness. So with hadith al-munkar, that considered to be of those hadith that will be classed as hadith al-da'if, and more severe case of hadith al-da'if. And in discussing concerning al-munkar, that it can occur in the matan, and also it can occur in the sanad. So the one that we may be more familiar with is case regarding the matan, thing that I mentioned in the matan regarding hadith al-munkar. So that is somewhat is mentioned in brief regarding hadith al-munkar. So we said that the hadith that will be the accepted version, as in the case that we mentioned. So the accepted version of the hadith will be, like in the case of the hadith of Ibn Abbas, then the correct narration of Ibn Abbas, that is mawquf upon him, will be said to be ma'ruf. And the version that is said to be da'if is referred to as munkar. So the rejected narration that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, in this case, we consider to be munkar. And the version that is said to be authentic, sahih, will be the mawquf version that goes back to Ibn Abbas. With this case of hadith, detecting this is as much as, so it's more clear regarding that. I would say based upon the definition that is the more established, the more common definition of today time is the one given by Ibn Hajar, which is ad-da'if yukhalif man huwa thika. But also, as we mentioned, as some of the was that the person to be cautious that hadith munkar also occurs regarding infirad, cases of a single narrator stating things other did not. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, that we'll end this session and continue discussing what is mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala in this book, as referred to as the one that we're going with, Talkhis Nukhbatul Fikr, which is the original author is Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, which is a book that gives us some insight into the topic of ilm ulum al-hadith, or ilm mustalah hadith, as it is referred to as today. So this is another of those terminologies used within the science of hadith. Hadith al-munkar and also al-ma'ruf. Munkar is what is said to be the da'if portion of the hadith, section of the hadith, version of the hadith, and the correct version, which is authentic, is referred to as ma'ruf. So this inshallah ta'ala will end. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخر دعوة الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.